Hello and welcome. This is how to maintain a storage water heater. I'm Ron. This is Mike. We got a lot to cover today. So let's kind of get right into it.
We're going to start with just a quick overview of the contents so you kind of know where we're headed as we have this discussion. We're going to start off with just the parts of a water heater because as we get into the details of how to do all this maintenance that we're going to teach you how to do today, we want to make sure that you're kind of aware of where we are and what we're talking about. Routine maintenance, that's the focus. All the things that you should be doing on a regular basis, and let's just be honest, most people aren't doing these things, but we'll show you how to do it and talk about why it's so important. We'll show you how to flush your storage water heater. We'll also show you how to change out the anode rod. If you've never heard that term and don't really know what that is, we'll talk about why it's important and how it's easily changed. It's really not a tough thing to do. And then at the end, we'll go through some warning signs because as your water heater sits there in the garage or in the crawl space or wherever it happens to be, you don't really pay much attention to your water heater. You want to make sure that you're watching out for these warning signs. They will be an indication that maybe you have a problem that you can address before it gets any worse.
And if you want some more detailed instructions, you can visit homedepot.com. We have additional resources in our related content area. There's a resource guide, link to videos, guides, tools. So let's kind of get right into it.
Right, so again, we're going to start with just an overview of the parts to give you some context because we are going to be referencing a lot of different things. And to be honest, a lot of them kind of look the same, but we want to make sure that you're kind of, square on where we are as we talk about these things. But let's start by talking about maintenance in general and why it's so important. It's like anything else in your house. The more you maintain it, the better it's going to operate, the more efficiently it's going to operate, and hopefully the longer it's going to last. And with water heaters especially, there's a couple of things that you should be doing yearly that most people either don't know about or have forgotten about and have never done. So we're going to talk about that because again, doing these relatively simple things can prolong the life of your water heater. It's going to save you money over time. It's going to maximize the efficiency because if you're doing this maintenance on a regular basis, your water heater is going to operate more efficiently. Again, going to save you money and it's going to prevent it from failing.
And just one key point of reference for everyone here, this is all about a storage water heater. We're not going to be discussing tankless units today.
Ron, what's the difference in a storage water heater and a tankless water heater?
A great question. So when you think of a storage water heater, you think the water is going to actually be stored in a tank. With a tankless unit, the water actually passes through the unit and actually heats and then keeps on going. Where in the storage, it sits in the tank and is heated continuously. Tankless, once again, water goes through it, gets heated, and goes about its business.
So again, there are two types of storage water heaters, gas and electric. They both heat water. They do it a little differently, like Ron said. They have a lot of the same parts, but they also have some unique parts.
In common, they both have cold water valves. This allows you to turn the water on and off. From the main, they've got to feed water into the actual tank. Just like the cold water getting fed into the tank, you have hot water. It's got to be released out and go throughout your home. That's a hot water outlet. But what if there's too much pressure in the tank itself? What happens then? Well, there's a safety mechanism for that, and that safety mechanism is called a temperature pressure release valve. It releases water if the tank overheats and has too much pressure. Super important. Now, attached to that pressure release valve is an overflow pipe. This allows the water to escape and go down into the overflow pan at the bottom or wherever you want to run that pipe from that pressure release valve.
So Ron, real quick, the safety valve, that is something that you can manually operate and activate if you need to, but it also is made to automatically release pressure if it gets too high within the tank and if the temperature gets too high.
That's absolutely correct.
And when that happens, the pipe that you mentioned, the overflow pipe, that's how it escapes and that's how it gets out of the water.
Yep, it just allows it to transport that water out wherever it is you want to send it.
Now, what about an anode rod? We're going to talk a lot about anode rods today because it is so important.
Well, an anode rod is designed to attract sediment in the tank. You've got water. Inside the water, you've got all kinds of minerals and different things, right, that you really don't want in the water. So the anode rod is designed to attract it. It's like a sacrificial rod. It's designed to fail. When it's gone or it doesn't get changed like it should, what happens to the storage tank itself? Well, then the storage tank itself starts to get attacked by those elements. You don't want that. Now, with that, you have two different types of material that anode rods are made out of. You have a magnesium and an aluminum. They both are designed to do the same thing, but each one of those types of metals reacts with different types of water from all over the country. Like if you got extremely hard water, you might want to go with an aluminum versus a magnesium, because sometimes that hard water mixed with that magnesium rod can put off kind of a egg smell or a sulfur smell in your water. So if you're experiencing that, that might be a quick tip for you to have it replaced with a different rod.
And we want to focus a little bit longer on the anode rod because of all the parts we're going to talk about. That's probably the most important to be maintained. And then, it's funny. Every time I've had a discussion about water heater maintenance with a friend and I've mentioned an anode rod, most often they're like, "What is that? I don't know what that is." Most people just they're not even aware that it exists and what it does. But like Ron said, if you think about it, there are a lot of contaminants in the water. The inside of your tank sits in water all the time. It's a storage unit. We talked about that. What happens when you put a piece of metal in water and just leave it there? It starts to change over time. It starts to corrode. It starts to rust. Things start to happen to that metal. The same thing would happen to the tank itself if you didn't have an anode rod. And like Ron said, it's made to sacrifice itself. It is more susceptible to those things in the water that will eventually cause damage, which is why it's in there. All the things that would ordinarily affect your tank are affecting the anode rod as long as it's there and functioning. But over time, it can wear out, it can corrode, it can disappear. We've seen anode rods that were literally, when you went to remove it, there's nothing there.
Just like a little nub.
Because it wasn't changed on a regular basis. So every 3 years, at least, depending on their circumstances, depending on your water type and where you live, that can fluctuate a bit. But on average, every 3 years, they should be changed. So it's really important to know that.
And they're not a whole lot of money. They're very, very reasonable. You can pick one up for $20 or $30. So why not change it whenever you do your flush? I mean, I'm kind of an overkill kind of person when it comes to stuff like that. So why shouldn't you? Now, the next thing is going to be insulation. All your storage water heaters are going to have some form of insulation that surrounds the tank. It helps reduce heat loss. Now, it's important to know when you're looking for one, not that I'm kind of showing you how to select one, but they're broken down into 6, 9, and 12-year type warranties. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what's the difference between that 6-year warranty, Mike, and that 12-year warranty? Well, it comes down to, the thickness of the storage tank itself, because a common thickness is going to be about 1.5 millimeters. And then the better quality ones are going to get thicker, like around 2 millimeters. Same thing goes with installation. A 6-year warranty type of water heater is probably going to have about 1 inch of insulation, if I can say that. And then, of course, the higher quality ones are going to have more insulation surrounding that tank.
So that was what they have in common, those things they both have in common. Let's talk about what makes them different. We'll start with gas. First of all, a gas water heater, has a flue and draft diverter. What is that? That's going to remove the fumes from the burning of the gas. Think about it. There is gas burning underneath the tank. That's what's heating the water. Well, when you're burning any kind of a fuel, obviously fumes are going to be created. They've got to escape somehow. So this flue is going to allow those fumes to escape through and out of the water heater, up and out of your house. But it's also going to help heat the water. Because it's in the water, it's in the middle of the tank, it's also going to carry heat and kind of disperse that heat into the water. So not only is it a safety feature to get the fumes out, but it's also going to help heat the water. Now, like I said, there's also a burner at the bottom. That's what is being, creating the heat that's heating the water. The burner controls the flames that heat the water. There's also a thermocoupler. That measures the temp with a sensor, so you can keep track of the temperature of the water and control that. There's also a control valve that's going to control the gas flow. You can use that to increase or decrease the water temperature. There's also a gas supply shutoff, which will, of course, allow you to turn on and off the gas.
Now, with electric water heaters, the first thing we need to understand is that when you heat something, heat rises, right? So depending on the size of the storage tank, if I only had one heating element in the storage tank, well, then the temperature from the bottom of the tank to the top of the tank could be completely different.
Very different.
That's why most 40-gallon and larger tanks are going to have two elements, an upper and a lower, depending on the size, like I said before. Now, each element is controlled by its own separate thermostat. That's important to know as well. Now, when you think about the anode rod, right? Well, they should be replaced every 3 years because you want to do it before it's saturated. Now, when we show you how to do this, the one that we pulled out probably could have got some more time out of it, but we went ahead and changed it for you anyway so you could see it.
In most cases, the anode rod is really easy to find. It's a big bolt, what looks to be a bolt, on the top of the water heater. You get a tool, you loosen it, you take it out. It's pretty simple. Other water heaters, like you see here, are really hard to find. You look on the outside of the smaller unit, you don't see an anode rod. Where is it? Well, in a lot of cases, the anode rod might be hidden underneath the cap, the top of the water heater. So in that case, you would simply loosen the screws, take that top off. Underneath, you'll see a layer or two of insulation. Start pulling that back, and then you'll see the anode rod. But again, in most cases, you won't have to do that. It'll be really easily accessible on the top of the water heater.
All right, all right.
Now, Ron, we're actually going to walk them through what you find on the inside of a water heater, because most people have never looked inside a water heater. Why is that important? A, we want to show you some of the parts like the anode rod so you can kind of see where it's located and get an idea of how it's working inside the tank with the water. But also, we want to show you the stuff that can be inside a water heater, because you may not realize the contaminants, all the things that we talked about, you can actually see some of those. And it's not just contaminants. Other things can come through your water and end up in your water heater. Not to mention, over time, some of the lining on the water heater can start to flake off. You'll see that in a second. So Ron, if you want to walk over, we actually picked up an old water heater and cut a hole in it. So Ron, why don't you head over and we'll talk through some of those things.
Happy to. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, what you have in front of you right now is an old 50-gallon gas water heater. Pulled it out of a salvage yard, decided to cut it open because who doesn't want to see the inside of an old water heater, and why it's even more important to provide the maintenance that we're going to show you in the workshop today. Also, what I have for you is a little point of use electric gas water heater, because we're going to show you a couple of things about an electric water heater, how to change out a heating element, etc. Now, if we go back over to the gas water heater, why don't we go ahead and take a closer look inside. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, as you take a look inside, the first thing I want to call your attention to is the very bottom of the water heater. You can see all the sediment buildup that has accumulated over time. And this is really not that terrible of a gas water heater, right? That was replaced. It probably was replaced for another reason other than sediment buildup. But you can see how absolutely nasty these things get over time.
Now, Ron, again, this is sediment in the water inside your water heater. And like you said, this one isn't that bad. It can get much worse. But if you have never drained your water heater, chances are yours looks like this or even worse. And this is stuff in your water, the water that is coming out of your faucets and your shower head.
The sediment on the bottom has been there so long, as you can see a little closer, you can see how scaled it's gotten. Now, what that scaled has done is it's provided a layer almost of protection over the water heater. So if I were to flush this thing after it not being flushed for so long, the chances are good that I'm going to uncover damage. It's just like whenever you sandblast an old car and you get rid of all the old putty and all those things, and all of a sudden all the holes in the pits and things happen. If you do this with a water heater, you're just going to actually mess the water heater up. That's why it's imperative that you do routine maintenance right away on your water heater.
And Ron, what we're looking at now are white splotches on the sides of the tank. You can actually see at the bottom, that is actually part of the lining that is worn off. Some of those larger flakes at the bottom was the lining, and it's starting to come off, and it's down here at the bottom.
Absolutely correct. Now, if you pan up, Mike, you can see this one rod off to the left.
But yeah, if you're wondering, all that crustiness, all that buildup on the anode rod is where it's attracting those elements in the water that, if the rod wasn't there, would be attacking the water heater itself. And like Ron said, that's why it's there. It's there to kind of sacrifice itself and attract those things in your water that will damage your water heater over time. And that's exactly what's going to happen if you've never changed your anode rod and it has disintegrated and it's not there doing its job anymore. That's why it's important to change these things out.
Okay, let me call your attention to the pipe in the middle. The primary role, of course, is going to be to get rid of the exhaust from the water heater and then vent it out the top and then out of your house. Okay, the secondary role is it's going to help heat the water as well. When the burner is on, the burner is going to heat the bottom. It's also going to heat the pipe. The heat's going to transfer all the way up the pipe, helping heat the water. And by the way, this is just for gas water heaters. Electric water heaters are going to heat the water via a heating element. And we're going to talk to you about that in just a few. And right now, over to the right, what you're looking at is the actual thermostat for the gas water heater. That holds the thermostat that's going to gauge exactly how hot the water is. And there are different types of controllers, some with what we call electric igniters, some that you got to ignite the pilot light itself, lots of different types that are out there.
Ron, you mentioned how the water is heated in the gas water heater. Talk a little bit about how that process is different in the electric unit.
There's a big burner under there. It's kind of like, just think of a gas stove for a gas water heater. Up under the tank, it's going to heat the water through natural gas. With an electric water heater, well, it's electric, but you have to have something to heat it. And what's inside the water heater are what we call heating elements. I'm holding one in my hand. I'm going to show you up close in just a minute as we take the small one out of the point of use so you can see this. Another key important point of maintenance: if you let this go too long and you don't drain these and the sediment builds up and the anode rod deteriorates to the point where it's got to seek something else to destroy, it is going to work on these heating elements. That's going to mess with the efficiency, its ability to actually heat the water, and lots of other things that might go along with it.
Ron, real quick, the anode rod and the heating element are in the water all the time. The anode rod is supposed to deteriorate over time, but the heating element is not. But like you said, if the anode rod is no longer effective, if it's gone completely or just corroded to the point that it's not working, those contaminants that would ordinarily attack the anode rod are going to go after the heating element.
That's right. They're going to go after two major things. One, the heating element, if it's electric, right? Also, the actual the tank itself that's holding the water. Oftentimes, if you start to get some kind of a leak at the bottom of your unit, we're going to go over, things to be aware of in a little while. But if you've got water coming out of the bottom of your tank, the chances are good that the tank inside of the unit has been compromised for one reason or the other. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove this heating element. Before we even do any of this, make sure you actually turn the power off at the actual circuit breaker on the panel, wherever that panel may be in your home. Phillips screwdriver, access to that little screw there. We're going to undo it and push that positive black wire aside. Do the same thing for the neutral wire. Once these things are released, now we're going to go ahead and use what we call a heating element wrench. All right, this is designed to remove the heating element from that water heater. So all we're going to do is we're going to slip it over, right? How it fits over there. And it's just like anything else. It's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So I use a screwdriver. I kind of toss it through there. And then all we're going to do is we are going to loosen it. Ooh, it's kind of tight. Once you get it to a certain point, you can lose the screwdriver and you can hand turn it the rest of the way. And that, my friends, is how easy it is to remove and check your heating element.
Now, Ron, in order to replace that, you would just reverse those steps, right? Insert the new one, tighten it by hand, use that tool to tighten it down really well, and then reconnect the wires.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, Ron, so that was a great demo. A lot of good information. There's one more thing we need to say about the heating element, though.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So whenever you're getting ready to take the heating element out, super important, you got to drain the water below the heating element, okay? Anytime you're doing anything to these water heaters, and you're having to take the heating element out, or you're having to take the anode rod out, you want to take some of the water out so that way the water's not coming, spilling out on you, because it is going to be hot.
Right. Now think about it. If your anode rod, like in this video we're going to show you, and in most water heaters is on the top, that's not really an issue, right? Because it's the top of the water heater. But in this case, that heating element was near the bottom. So it's near the bottom of the tank. There's a lot of water above it. So to Ron's point, if that's the case, you've got to drop the water level to below that, or it's going to come out of that hole, because that heating element goes through a hole in the side of the tank into the water. So if you remove it, the water is going to come out. And it's the same way if your anode rod is on the side. That's rare. You don't see that very often, but sometimes they are. So if that's the case, you've got to lower the water level inside the tank to below where that anode rod is.
Last thing, when dealing with the heating element, after you get it installed, turn the water on and get the tank filled back up again before you turn the heating element or turn the electric water heater back on, because you're going to burn out your heating element if you do that.
Yeah, think about it. Just remember, it's easy to remember that heating element is designed to be in the water, heating the water. If there's no water, it shouldn't be on and it shouldn't be heating. So to Ron's point, if you drop the water to remove it, make sure you fill it back up before you reactivate that heating element. It's really important. Now, the demo that we're about to show you is all about how to flush a water heater. Now, if you've done any research into maintenance of a water heater, you've probably seen the words drain and flush. They're very similar, but there's a little bit of a difference. Ron, let's talk about the difference and why we think flushing is a better option.
I'd love to. So let's think about draining it. When I open up the valve to drain it, you're going to see that. It gets drained by just good old-fashioned gravity. It's going to take a while. It's just going to drain, 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 drain. But it's just letting the water out of the tank. It's not really getting rid of any of the sediment that's built up on the bottom. In order to do that, you've got to stir it up a little bit. And that's where what we call a power flush comes into play, or a flush. The difference is the flush, we're allowing new water to come into the tank at the same time pushing the old water out. And this kind of tsunami effect is just stirring it all up on the bottom, and it's pushing more sediment out of the tank.
Right. So just so you have the difference really clear, there's nothing wrong with draining. You can drain your tank, and if you're doing it on a regular basis, that may be enough. But like Ron said, draining just lets the water come out. You're going to get rid of some of the sediment. You're likely not to get rid of all of the sediment. So the longer it's been since it was done, or if you've maybe moved into a home and you're not sure when it was done last, you probably want to flush it, because if you're just letting the water run out, whatever happens to come out with it is going to come out. But if you're flushing it, you're not just letting the water drain, you're putting in more water, so there's more movement. Water is coming in and pushing the water out. So that movement, the more movement there is, the more sediment's going to be moved. So just know that there's a slight difference in the two. We suggest a flush, and that's what we're going to demo today.
And at the end of the day, it's a really, really fairly short, simple process. And here are the steps for how to replace the anode rod and flushing a storage water heater.
Now, as we mentioned, you should replace your anode rod about every 3 years, not each time you flush the tank. We will replace the one in this tank since it's been about 3 years since the tank has been flushed. Your water heater uses water and gas or electric to do its job, and you will need to shut them all off to drain or flush it.
First, if you have an electric water heater, shut the power off to the tank at the circuit breaker. This step is critical because you do not want the heating element on when there is no water in the tank. This can burn out the heating element. If you have a gas tank, you can turn off the thermostat, or if it has a vacation setting, you can use it to stop the flow of gas to the tank. By not turning off the gas completely, you avoid needing to reignite the pilot light when you're done.
You also want to turn off the cold water supply. To do this, use the valve on the cold water supply line on the tank. The water is on when the control knob is in line with the water pipe. It's off when it runs perpendicular to the pipe. The advantage to this approach is you won't be turning off the water to the rest of the house, but you can also turn off the water at the main valve, usually located near the water heater or the meter outside your home near the street.
Next, you will need to locate your anode rod. In most cases, they are found at the top of your water heater. In rare cases, your anode rod may be on the side of your unit. Check your owner's manual for specifics for your model. The exposed part of the rod will look almost like a large head of a bolt, which is actually the top end of the anode rod.
Now, if you don't see a bolt or you don't see the top of the anode rod, that means yours is not exposed and you will need to look for a cap on the top that opens to insulation that must be removed to get to the top of the anode rod. In some cases, you may have to remove the whole top of the unit and remove temporarily some of the insulation in order to get to the anode rod. If you have problems locating yours, check your owner's manual or the manufacturer's website for specifics on your model.
If only changing the rod and not completing a full flush, you would first drain about 10% of the water out of the tank. This prevents any hot water from being released through the opening and burning you. Gauge the 10% based on the gallon capacity of your tank.
If you're doing the replacement of the anode rod in conjunction with flushing the water heater, you still want to remove only 10% of the water at this time. The weight of the water left in the tank will help steady it as you work to remove the anode rod, since old rods can be hard to remove. This also helps avoid loosening other connections on your tank. You'll remove the rest of the water later when you flush the tank.
Connect the hose to the drain outlet located at the bottom of the unit. Run the hose either outside your home or to an appropriate drain. In a basement, that may be a plumbing drain. Open the drain valve at the bottom. The drain valve might either be a valve turned by hand or one that requires a flathead screwdriver like the one this unit has.
Now, the water will not drain with much force at this point because you've turned off the water flow and there won't be much pressure behind the water flow. Don't forget to close the valve once you've removed enough water. To remove the anode rod, you have options. You'll need a 1 1/16 inch socket and wrench. You can use a regular wrench and socket as well.
Now, if that doesn't work, you can try a breaker bar, which is just a really big socket wrench. You can also place a pipe over a standard wrench to create more leverage. The easiest method is to use an impact driver with your socket. Never use a penetrating catalyst or loosening agent on a water heater component, as they may seep into the unit and contaminate your hot water supply. Have someone helping to steady the water heater as you go. If you find that your rod is in good condition, you may want to consider reinstalling it and waiting to replace it at a later date. Remove it carefully, making sure not to bang it against the sides of your water heater, as the liner can be damaged.
Now let's talk about that just a bit more. If you remove an anode rod and you see that it's in pretty good shape, it is okay to reinstall it and wait to replace it a bit later. But how do you know? Again, this is a new anode rod. So see, it's very smooth. There's no corrosion, really good shape. This one obviously is an old one. It has some corrosion. Physically, this one's in pretty good shape. There's corrosion on it. You can see that, but physically the shape of it has not changed. There's not big chunks out of it like you would see in some. In some, the actual rod is starting to disappear. In really bad cases, there's hardly any rod left at all. It's actually disintegrated. So this one's physically in good shape. Even though it's corrosion on it, it's still physically good.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's how you would know. So if you take it out and it's in good shape, you can even maybe clean it off, right? If it's got some corrosion on it, you can scrape that off, get it nice and clean and put it back in. Just basically, the more it looks like this one, the more okay it is to leave it in.
Yep.
If you have limited overhead space, you may need to bend and cut the anode rod in order to remove it in pieces, because the full length won't come out all at once. So Ron, real quick, sometimes people have maybe a smaller unit and it's actually in a small space in their house. There isn't a lot of overhead over it. If you're in a garage and you've got 5 or 6 feet of space over your water heater, then you're fine. This is actually going to come right out and you have plenty of room to remove it out of the water heater. That may not be the case. You may start to remove it and you start bumping into something. You can't get the entire rod out. What would you do in that case, especially if it's older and it is really corroded? You can maybe start to bend it and cut it and take it out in sections. But that's another reason why they have anode rods like this. If you can see those little sections in there that are meant to bend, if you're replacing a rod like that and you've done whatever you need to do to get it out, you've chopped it into pieces and bent it, you can actually bend this one and put it in sections.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about them. They're super flexible. I mean, you can like bend them. See how easy that is to bend? And by the way, you can actually snap these off as well. So you want to be careful when you're bending them because you don't want to go back and forth too many times. If you do, that's going to snap right off.
Right.
That's what's so awesome about them being flexible like that. Now, as we just said, as you can see here, this anode rod isn't in terrible shape. Trust us, they get much, much worse. But you can tell how much corrosion is there even after just a few years. Now it's time to install the new anode rod. First, wrap the threads at the top of the rod with plumber's tape. Make sure that you wrap in the opposite direction that the rod will be tightened. The rod will install in a clockwise rotation. The tape should be wrapped in the opposite direction, counterclockwise.
This way the tape is being kept in place as the rod is installed and tightened. If you wrap the tape in the same direction, it will loosen and bunch up as you tighten the anode rod. Simply replace the anode rod into the opening and tighten by hand using the socket without the wrench until it's snug. Then tighten a few more turns with your socket wrench, but be sure not to over tighten.
Now that you've replaced the old anode rod, you are ready to proceed with the full flush of your water heater. The water in your water heater is extremely hot. If you're only draining the water heater, it's a good idea to let the water heater sit for a while before draining it to give the water a chance to cool.
Running the hot water somewhere in your house can help speed up the cooling process. Since we're flushing the water heater, we'll be adding cold water into the tank throughout the process, which will help cool off the water.
To begin the flush process, open a hot water tap like a sink faucet closest to the water heater. In a 2-story home, choose one upstairs closest to the water heater. This helps alleviate pressure and allows the tank to drain quicker.
Open the drain valve at the bottom of the unit. Turn the cold water supply back on. The water will begin to flow into and out of the tank. As you can see here, there is sediment buildup that comes out with the water.
You may be surprised at how much may have built up in your water heater, especially if it's been a while or the tank has never been drained. Continue this step until the water runs clear and is cool to the touch. At this point, you know all the hot water has been flushed out of the system.
Again, the reason a full flush is more beneficial than simply draining the water heater is that the pressure and movement of the water moving into and out of the tank helps flush and push out more sediment.
The more movement in the water, the more pressure on the sediment. At this point, you can remove the hose from the drain valve and be sure to close the valve. Turn the power back on for electric unit, turn the thermostat back on in the on position, or take it off vacation mode for a gas unit. You may have to reignite your pilot light. Consult your owner's manual for that process.
Now remember, the faucet that you turned on earlier will still be running. You can let that run until the trapped air in the line is released and the spitting and sputtering stops, and you're getting hot water out of the faucet again. Turning on more than one faucet will speed up that process. So there you have it. Hopefully you got a lot out of that. As you can see, it's not a terribly complex process, but we cannot stress enough how important it is. You need to drain or flush your storage water heater at least once a year, and you want to be checking that anode rod, and on average changing that out probably every 3 years, in addition to the heating element.
Yep. So there are some questions out there probably floating around, and the one that comes to mind is, what if I can't get the anode rod out? What do I do? Well, you can do a couple different things to loosen it up. What you may have to do is you may have to get yourself an impact driver, put the socket on it, and just let it run on it until it breaks it loose. See, here's what happens. When those are manufactured and those anode rods are put in at the factory, they use a Loctite on the actual threads of the bolt itself. So you have to break the Loctite in order to get it out, right? Because they just really want to make sure that it's sealed right. So that's a kind of an important thing. So you can use the impact wrench to loosen it up. Now, what I've had to do in the past is if I had to actually smack the the anode rod bolt at the top with a hammer a couple of times to get it to loosen up. So whether you're using a long breaker bar, a wrench with a long pipe on it, an impact driver, be patient because they're not real simple, easy to get out. Something else.
Real quick on that, Ron. Always have somebody with you, because if you're focused on that what looks like a bolt, the top of the anode rod, and it's stuck and you're getting frustrated and you're just doing whatever you can to get it out, you could start moving your water heater, and you don't want to do that because there's a lot of things connected to a lot of other things.
Yep.
You can do some damage on hook stuff, which you don't want to do. So have somebody on hand just either helping steady it or at least just keeping track of how hard you're working to get that thing out. Because again, you don't want to be so focused that you start moving your water heater. Have someone there keep an eye on that.
The next thing is, what if I can't find it?
Yep.
Because they can be hidden sometimes. Because in the smaller tanks, you're going to find that they're not really going to be on the outside. They might be covered with a cap. You might have to dig through the insulation to find it, right? Or you might actually have to remove it. So what we'd like to do is just kind of give you an idea of what that looks like in a place where you wouldn't think one would be.
Right, now we showed this earlier, but just to remind you, on a smaller unit, it might be underneath the top of the unit, which you have to unscrew and remove and look under the insulation. So really easy to do, but if you don't know to go there, you'll be looking around the outside being kind of frustrated. I don't see it, I don't think I have one. You do, it's probably just underneath the top of the water heater.
And the last thing, what if I've just got no room to remove the rod? Maybe you're in a condo, maybe you're in an apartment. You got a condo, your water heater is in a closet somewhere, right? And you don't have the headroom in order to get the actual rod out. What do I do then?
Right, we talked about this earlier, but just to remind you, again, a normal anode rod is pretty long, right? If your water heater doesn't have much clearance above it, you don't have room to take this out. You're going to start running into something. If that's the case, the older this is and the more corroded it is, the easier it would be to bend it and cut it and take it out in sections. And that might be what you have to do. But then again, when you reinstall a new one, they've got these, because you're going to have the same problem going back in that you had coming out. A long, solid anode rod is not going to get in there because you don't have room to get it on top over that hole. But these are made to bend. You can see those little spaces in there. These are made to bend. So you can bend this as you go in, and it allows you to get it in there. Talked about it before, but really important to know that that's the case with these.
And if you do have to cut them, just understand it's either aluminum or magnesium. It's a soft metal. You can use a hacksaw to cut it out in little sections as you're pulling it out. You know, just grab the bottom of it with a pair of pliers, cut off a piece, pull it out a little bit more, you know, or however much headroom that you have in order to get it out of there.
Again, if you have to do that though, make sure if you have a partner or a friend helping you, make sure that they've got a good grip on that thing, because you don't want to cut it and have it drop down in there. Then you can't get it out at all. So make sure that you've got a good grasp of it as you're cutting it and taking it out. So now, finally, we want to talk about warning signs. We mentioned this at the top of the workshop. There are things that you should look out for that will be indications that you have a problem. And again, most people aren't really looking at their water heater very often. You normally really don't pay attention to it until it breaks and it's not working. And then you start looking at it thinking, what's the problem? But there are some pretty easy and obvious things you should look out for that will indicate you probably have a problem either starting or already in place. So Ron, what are some of those things?
Well, let's first start off, let's say that you got a gas water heater and you start to smell some gas. All right, so the very first thing you're going to do, if you start to smell gas whatsoever, you're going to shut that gas off. You're going to call to have the gas line checked. All right, real important when we're dealing with gas water heaters, okay? Then maybe your water is not as hot as it should be, right? So you can check the actual control box on the gas. You can check the thermostats on the electric, make sure they're set properly. If that's all good to go, then you might want to think about replacing the heating element on an electric or the thermostat on an electric as far as the electric ones go.
Right. Now, another thing you need to be on the lookout for are leaky pipes. First, check the pipes coming in and out of the unit, because there are several pipes that are connected to the unit. Any kind of leaks is something you want to take care of right away. Look for moisture or corrosion. If you've got a leak that maybe you don't see a physical leak, you don't see a puddle, but if there's any kind of moisture on the outside, or if it's starting to rust at any point, that's an indication that you might have a problem. Any kind of green or white crusty buildup, that's not really normal. That's an indication that you have some corrosion or moisture somewhere that shouldn't maybe be there. That's maybe an indication that there's a seal that's
Yep.
loose or a joint that's coming loose. And if you're doing the kind of maintenance that we've talked about, again, we talked about not moving the unit and as not moving it much at all if possible. But if you did move it, you can loosen some of those connection points and you could develop a leak. So you want to check that out as well.
So it's real important for you guys to understand that if we're dealing with like a leak in a valve or a leak in a pipe, those things are repairable, Mike. Okay. If we're looking at water under the tank and there's no leaks coming from any pipes or any valves, the chances are good the storage tank in the inside has been compromised. If the storage tank on the inside is compromised and it's leaking from the bottom, you're probably going to end up having to replace it. That's when it's time to call somebody in order for them to come out and take a look at it. But I'm telling you that the chances are good you probably have to replace it.
Right. And we mentioned earlier, because you don't look at your water heater very often, you might have some water gathered. Doesn't necessarily mean the tank is leaking. It could be that you have a small drip somewhere else and it's just accumulated, but you haven't noticed it. So the first thing you probably want to do is check all those connections because it might be that. But if the connections are good, then you probably do have a problem with the tank.
And then again, the pressure relief valve could have activated
Released,
because of
right.
too much pressure in the tank, and you could have get some water through that way as well.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing is discolored water. Who wants to turn their faucet on and get that discolored, rusty kind of looking water? This is probably going to be a water heater problem. It could be corrosion or buildup in the sediment of the tank. An easy way to determine whether or not it's coming from the water, the city water source, or your water heater, your storage tank water heater, is to turn on the cold tap, because the cold tap's not connected to the water heater. So if the cold tap is running nice and clean, you know it's not your city water, you know it's your storage tank. Now, if you turn it on and you got rusty, discolored water coming out of the cold, well, you get a bigger problem. You need to call the municipality in your area to seek some guidance on that. But if left untreated, right, it has to do with draining that sediment. That sediment is built up so much that it's backed up into your water supply and now it's coming out your faucet.
Now, the last thing that we want to warn you about is a noisy tank. Water heaters are designed to be relatively quiet. That's another reason why you don't really notice them that often. They don't make a lot of noise. If they are making noise, you probably have a problem because they're not supposed to be making noise in the first place. It's a sign that something's probably wrong. There might be sediment buildup causing cracks, popping, any kind of rumbling noises in there. There's something going on in there that is not quite right, not normal. So if you have a noisy tank, that's something you want to check out as well.
And getting back really quick to the discolored water, the fix would be to first change out that anode rod, because that anode rod's probably been destroyed to the point where it's no longer catching the sediment, and that's why it's filling up with so much sediment that it's backing up into your water supply. So drain, flush, change the anode rod, and it should be good to go.
All right, so let's say that you've looked around your water heater, you've looked for these warning signs, and you found some of these problems, and you've determined that it's time for a new water heater. What do? This is one of those situations where you need it addressed pretty quickly. You can live without hot water, but you probably don't want to. It's one of those things you want fixed pretty quickly. If you don't know where to turn and you've never had any kind of service on your water heater, know that you can count on the Home Depot. Our service providers can do a repair or a replacement, possibly same day. If you live within 30 miles of a Home Depot store and you call us Monday through Friday before noon, there's a good chance they can get you a new water heater installed the same day. All you got to do, go to homedepot.com and just search services. It will take you to the services page that talks about all the different home services that we provide, including water heater maintenance and service. So just know that's a resource for you if you don't know where else to turn, but we've got your back if you have a problem with your water heater.
All right, so we covered a lot of stuff today, Mike. So just a quick recap. We covered down on the parts of that gas and that electric storage water heater. We showed you the routine maintenance, the anode change, the flush. We also showed you the warning signs to look for and possible causes and fixes to those warning signs. Now, Mike, there's only one thing left for us to do.
And that is to thank you guys. Hopefully you got a lot out of this workshop and now appreciate and understand how important it is to maintain your storage water heater. So on behalf of Ron, myself, the entire Workshops Live team, We want to thank you for joining us today. More importantly, we want to thank you for shopping at the Home Depot.